In 1969, Charles Manson orchestrated a series of murders that shocked the world.
If I wanted to kill somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing.
Through manipulation, fear, and cult-like control, he convinced his followers to commit brutal killings, leaving a trail of blood and terror across Los Angeles. The story behind the Manson family's violence is darker than most could imagine.
You scared to die?
Sometimes I feel I'm scared to live. Living is what scares me. Dying is easy.
Charles Manson was born in 1934, a child of instability, neglect, and early encounters with crime. His upbringing was chaotic, marked by periods in reform schools and juvenile detention, shaping a personality that thrived on manipulation and control.
I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it. I have it here.
By the 1960s, Manson had emerged as a charismatic yet dangerous figure, drawing vulnerable young people into his orbit with promises of love, freedom, and belonging. Manson formed what would become known as the Manson Family, a loose collection of devoted followers, primarily young women, who became utterly loyal to his vision. Through psychological manipulation, fear, and isolation, he cultivated an environment where obedience was absolute and questioning his authority was unthinkable. At the heart of Manson's teachings was the concept of Helter Skelter, an apocalyptic race war he claimed was imminent. Interpreting the Beatles' song of the same name as a prophecy, Manson convinced his followers that their violent actions could ignite chaos and allow them to seize power in a post-apocalyptic world. The belief in this manufactured ideology gave Manson complete control over his cult, allowing him to direct their actions toward increasingly sinister objectives. By 1969, Manson's influence over his followers had grown so strong that he could orchestrate murders with cold precision, selecting targets and convincing his followers to commit crimes that shocked Los Angeles and the world. The Tate-LaBianca killings would become the most infamous demonstration of his ability to manipulate devotion into unthinkable violence, leaving a legacy of fear, fascination, and horror that endures to this day. And yet, these murders were only the beginning. The deeper story of Manson's cult reveals a system of control and terror that continues to haunt America's collective consciousness. Charles Manson's power came not just from charisma, but from his ability to manipulate vulnerable individuals into absolute loyalty. The Manson family was composed largely of young women who had grown up in difficult circumstances, searching for belonging and meaning. Manson offered them love, acceptance, and a sense of purpose, all while isolating them from the outside world and controlling every aspect of their lives. Through a combination of drugs, fear, and psychological tactics, Manson maintained dominance over his followers. He convinced them that the world outside was corrupt and dangerous, while positioning himself as the sole authority and guide.
I tried to stop the Vietnam War, and I did it. And I was convicted for being the father of this country. And all the things I did without breaking the law.
Members were taught to obey without question, to commit acts in his name, and to suppress any personal morality that conflicted with his orders. This created a cult-like environment where independent thought was replaced by devotion to Manson's ideology.
Central to his manipulation was the concept of Helter Skelter, a prophesized race war. Manson framed the murders as a necessary act to trigger chaos and survival, convincing his followers that violence was morally justified and even necessary to achieve a higher purpose. The psychological grip he had over the family allowed him to orchestrate murders with chilling efficiency, transforming ordinary young people into agents of terror. The family lived communally on ranches such as Spawn Ranch, cut off from the outside world. Daily life was a mix of manual labor, indoctrination, and preparation for violent acts, creating an environment where Manson's control went unchallenged and absolute. As the grip of manipulation tightened, the family became ready to commit crimes that would shock the nation.
When somebody needs to be killed, there's no wrong. You do it. And then you move on.
Turning Manson's twisted ideology into real-world carnage that few could comprehend. At the core of Charles Manson's manipulation was his apocalyptic belief system, which he called Helter Skelter. Inspired by a misinterpretation of the Beatles song, Manson convinced his followers that a race war was imminent and that only the Manson family could survive and ultimately rule in its aftermath. This ideology gave a morally distorted justification for the violence he commanded.
You people have done everything in the world to me. Doesn't that give me equal right? I can do anything I want to you people at any time I want to, because that's what you've done to me.
Manson presented Helter Skelter as inevitable, persuading his followers that their actions would accelerate the coming chaos. He framed murders and intimidation as a means to provoke fear, destabilize society, and trigger the predicted war. The ideology was deeply entwined with Manson's control over his followers. By believing in a higher purpose, they were more willing to commit acts they would have previously considered unthinkable. The concept was not merely abstract. Manson tied Helter Skelter to real-world targets, choosing victims who represented wealth, status, or societal influence. The infamous Tate-LaBianca murders were conducted under the belief that these killings would ignite social upheaval, furthering his prophecy. Graffiti left at crime scenes, including phrases like Helter Skelter and Death to Pigs, underscored the ideological component and Manson's desire to broadcast a message of fear and chaos.
I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. You do exactly what I say.
Helter Skelter also reinforced the psychological isolation of the family. Followers internalized the belief that the outside world was corrupt, while Manson was the only source of truth and guidance. This mental framework made them more susceptible to obedience, as disobedience was framed as jeopardizing the family's survival and their role in the prophecy.
Whatever is necessary to do, you do it.
As the ideology took hold, the line between belief and action blurred, transforming Manson's followers from impressionable youth into instruments of terror. The deadly consequences of Helter Skelter would soon shock Los Angeles and the world. By mid-1969, Charles Manson's influence over the family reached its peak, and he began planning murders to fulfill his Helter Skelter prophecy. The targets were chosen carefully, wealthy individuals in Los Angeles whose deaths would capture media attention and instill widespread fear. Manson selected victims not for personal grievances, but to symbolize societal elites and accelerate the apocalyptic chaos he envisioned. The most infamous operation was the Tate murders on August 8, 1969. Manson directed key followers, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, and Charles Tex Watson, to carry out the killings at actress Sharon Tate's home, where she was 8 months pregnant. The plan was meticulously rehearsed, including the use of weapons, movement through the property, and psychological intimidation. Every act was intended to maximize terror, both for the victims and the public. The following night, Manson instructed the family to continue the violence with the LaBianca murders. Lino and Rosemary LaBianca were chosen as additional symbols of wealth and authority. Again, the killings were calculated. The family entered the home under cover of night, restrained the victims, and executed them in a way that reinforced Manson's apocalyptic narrative. Manson's instructions were chilling in their detail. He encouraged leaving messages in blood, such as Helter Skelter and Death to Pigs, to amplify fear and propagate the ideology behind the murders. By orchestrating these killings over 2 nights, Manson not only executed a plan of terror, but also cemented the family's obedience, proving the extent of his psychological control. The planning and execution of these murders marked the culmination of Manson's manipulation. The events would shock the nation, leaving an indelible mark on Los Angeles and demonstrating how ideology and charisma
can transform followers into instruments of terror. On the night of August 8, 1969, the Manson family carried out the Tate murders, leaving a trail of terror that would shock Los Angeles. Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, along with 4 others, were brutally stabbed and shot in her home. The attackers left messages scrawled in blood on the walls, including Helter Skelter, as a signature of the ideology driving the killings. The violence was deliberate and methodical. Manson's followers moved with chilling precision, showing no hesitation as they carried out the acts. Each killing was intended not only to eliminate the victims, but to instill fear in the community and amplify the apocalyptic narrative Manson had instilled in his cult. The combination of psychological manipulation and extreme brutality transformed ordinary young people into instruments of terror. The following night, the Manson family attacked Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. Again, the killings were carried out with extreme violence, leaving horrifying scenes of bloodshed and terror. Messages were written in blood, symbolizing both rebellion and the chaos Manson sought to provoke. These murders demonstrated the full scope of the family's obedience, reflecting how deeply Manson's influence had corrupted their moral compass. The aftermath was immediate. The city was gripped with fear and confusion, unable to comprehend how young, seemingly ordinary individuals could commit such atrocities. Law enforcement began investigating the string of murders, uncovering the connections to Manson's cult and the disturbing ideology of Helter Skelter. The Tate-LaBianca murders marked the pinnacle of the Manson family's terror campaign, demonstrating the horrifying consequences of manipulation, obedience, and extremist belief. And even as law enforcement mobilized, the question lingered: how could one man turn devotion into a weapon of mass terror? The news of the Tate-LaBianca murders sent shockwaves through Los Angeles and the world. Americans were horrified that such brutality could occur in affluent neighborhoods, leaving innocent civilians, including a pregnant woman, dead in what appeared to be a senseless spree. The murders were not only violent, but ritualistic, with messages scrawled in blood that added an element of psychological terror. The media quickly seized upon the story, reporting the gruesome details and the mysterious Manson family connection. Fear spread as people realized that the killers were young, impressionable followers, drawn into murder by the charismatic yet dangerous leader, Charles Manson. The realization that a single individual could manipulate others to commit such acts challenged societal assumptions about morality, authority, and human behavior. Law enforcement scrambled to investigate, piecing together the link between the 2 nights of killings and the Manson cult. Witness accounts, forensic evidence, and tips from acquaintances of the family began to reveal a web of psychological manipulation, control, and ideology that made the crimes possible. Public fear and fascination escalated as Americans tried to comprehend the motives behind the murders. The events prompted national conversations about cult influence, obedience, and the dark potential of charismatic leaders. Families were frightened to let children wander freely, and communities began to view seemingly ordinary youth with suspicion, fearing they might be drawn into extremist ideologies. The immediate aftermath left Los Angeles traumatized and the nation questioning how one man's vision could turn devotion into deadly action. And while the public tried to understand the horror, law enforcement was only beginning to unravel the twisted network behind the killings. Following the shocking Tate-LaBianca murders, law enforcement launched one of the most intensive criminal investigations in American history. Police were confronted with a complex web of cult manipulation, extreme violence, and cryptic messages left at crime scenes. The investigation quickly revealed that the murders were orchestrated by a group of devoted followers under the control of Charles Manson.
Detectives relied on witness testimonies, informants,
and forensic evidence to unravel the family's activities. Neighbors reported unusual behavior at Manson's residences, and acquaintances of the family began to provide crucial tips about the members' involvement in criminal acts. Authorities pieced together connections between the two nights of killings, uncovering Manson's influence as the mastermind behind the terror. The investigation culminated in the arrest of Manson and several key followers, including Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, and Charles Tex Watson. Their confessions, coupled with the evidence, revealed the scope of the manipulation and obedience that allowed Manson to transform ordinary young people into murderers. Law enforcement also faced the challenge of understanding the cult's ideology, particularly the apocalyptic Helter Skelter beliefs that drove the murders. Profilers and psychologists were brought in to explain how Manson's charisma, psychological control, and strategic indoctrination created blind loyalty and fear among his followers. The arrest of Manson marked the beginning of a national reckoning with cult influence, manipulation, and the dark potential of charismatic leaders. The public grappled with understanding how one man could wield such power, turning devotion into instruments of deadly terror. But even behind bars, Manson's influence persisted, leaving society to question the boundaries of control, manipulation, and the human psyche. And as the trial approached, the nation braced itself for the horrifying details that would emerge in the courtroom. The trial of Charles Manson and his followers began in 1970 and quickly became one of the most sensationalized legal cases in American history. The nation was riveted, eager to understand how a charismatic man could convince young adults to commit heinous murders. The courtroom became a stage for revealing the depth of psychological manipulation and the terrifying ideology behind the killings. Prosecutors meticulously detailed the Tate-LaBianca murders, presenting evidence of Manson's control over the family. Witnesses testified about Manson's influence, the cult's internal dynamics, and the chilling obedience of his followers. The use of forensic evidence, coupled with confessions from key members like Susan Atkins, painted a vivid picture of how the murders were pre-planned and orchestrated under Manson's direction. Psychologists and expert witnesses analyzed Manson's methods, explaining how isolation, drugs, and fear were used to maintain loyalty. The court heard how Manson's ideology, particularly the apocalyptic Helter Skelter prophecy, was internalized by his followers, compelling them to carry out acts of extreme violence with little hesitation. In 1971, the verdict was delivered. Manson and several of his followers were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Initially sentenced to death, Manson's sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment after California's death penalty laws were temporarily ruled unconstitutional in 1972. His followers received similar sentences, reflecting the gravity of the crimes and the extraordinary manipulation involved. The trial not only brought justice to the victims, but also served as a cultural and legal reckoning, exposing the dangers of cult dynamics, psychological control, and ideological extremism. Even in prison, Manson remained a figure of fascination and fear, a symbol of how charisma and ideology can corrupt, manipulate, and transform ordinary people into instruments of terror.
The case of Charles Manson and his followers provides a chilling example of how psychological manipulation can transform ordinary people into perpetrators of extreme violence. Experts have studied the Manson family extensively, examining how Manson exploited vulnerabilities, dependency, and group dynamics to maintain control over his cult. Manson's methods combined isolation, drugs, fear, and emotional manipulation. Followers were separated from their families and the outside world, living in communal settings like Spahn Ranch, where they were subjected to constant indoctrination. Manson framed himself as the sole authority and source of truth, convincing his followers that their actions were morally justified within the context of his Helter Skelter prophecy. The cult environment fostered blind obedience. Members internalized Manson's ideology to the point where independent thought became almost impossible. Daily routines, work, and even relationships were structured to reinforce loyalty and dependence. The use of LSD and other drugs further weakened critical thinking and reinforced Manson's psychological grip. Sociologists and criminologists have also noted the influence of group dynamics. The family created an echo chamber where dissent was discouraged and social reinforcement amplified compliance. Fear of punishment, combined with the desire for acceptance and belonging, drove members to commit acts they would have otherwise considered unthinkable. Manson's ability to manipulate psychological needs, ideological beliefs, and social conformity highlights the dangerous potential of charismatic leaders. The family's actions demonstrate how ideology, when combined with control and fear, can produce horrific consequences, blurring the line between free will and coercion. Understanding the psychological mechanisms behind Manson's control is crucial, not only for historical insight, but as a warning of how similar dynamics can emerge in other cults or extremist movements. And yet, the question remains: what drives ordinary people to surrender completely to such destructive influence? The terror orchestrated by Charles Manson and his family left an indelible mark on American society. The Tate-LaBianca murders demonstrated the horrifying power of psychological manipulation, showing how a charismatic individual could convert devotion into instruments of death. Beyond the immediate loss of life, the murders exposed the vulnerability of young, impressionable individuals to coercion and extremist ideology. The Manson case continues to serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of cults, charismatic leaders, and blind obedience. It illustrates how isolation, fear, and ideology can override moral judgment, transforming ordinary people into perpetrators of unimaginable violence. The sociological and psychological lessons remain relevant today, reminding society of the importance of critical thinking, social support, and awareness of manipulative influence. Culturally, Manson's crimes reshaped the perception of American counterculture, instilling fear and skepticism about youth movements in the late 1960s. Films, books, and documentaries have kept the story alive, analyzing both the psychological mechanisms of the family and the enduring fascination with Manson as a symbol of terror. Yet amidst the horror, the stories of survivors and the victims' families remind us of resilience and the human capacity to endure. Their courage in facing trauma, testifying in court, and preserving the memory of the victims ensure that the lessons of the Manson family are not forgotten. The darkness of Charles Manson's cult killings challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths about human psychology, manipulation, and the consequences of blind loyalty. And while the family is gone, their legacy remains a stark warning. The potential for extremism and violence lies not just in ideology, but in the power of influence over the human mind. Could such manipulation rise again in another form? The answer remains chillingly uncertain.